we can make sure if anybody has to miss this session, they can catch up, or if you want to go back over something. I've got a little exercise for you to do a little bit later in this session. And of course, we'll have our little coffee break halfway through. Also, at the end of this session, you are going to get a little assignment. Now, don't get too stressed out here because it shouldn't take you too long at all. It's just a bit of thinking and consolidating of the learnings from this session. But I'll take you through that and I'll show you exactly how to do it at the end. Okay, so this module, we are going to delve further into those kinetic energy thresholds. We had a chat about these before, but we're going to go in a little bit more detail around kinetic energy levels and thresholds for intersections, and then look at what is it about intersections that would align highly with safe system principles or what wouldn't align highly. And we're going to have a look at characteristics of mid-block locations as well that align highly with safe system principles. Of course, throughout this module and throughout the course, I'm always happy to answer questions. So pop them in the chat as you think of them. And even if it's other topics you'd like to, you'd like some intel on, I might be able to provide something immediately, or maybe able to dig up a report and pop that into the resources, or maybe someone else in the chat is able to point you at a report that's been done in New Zealand or somebody that's working on a similar project. It's good to get those connections. So let's talk about intersections. So intersections are like this interesting point on our network where we see increased risk due to a number of factors. So the most obvious one being the conflict points that we have. And for those who aren't familiar with that term conflict points, I'll show you a conflict point diagram a little bit later on, but it essentially is, ways that two vehicles or a vehicle and another road user can collide, that point of conflict. So interestingly, when we see a graph of risk for a length of road, what we'll inevitably see is sort of the risk. Say you got risk there, the risk goes along at whatever level it is, bouncing around a little bit, but then it'll just spike, and it'll spike again, and it'll spike again. And these are our intersections. So we have a sort of mid-block inherent risk, and then we see a spike around that intersection due to those conflict points and the ability for that crash to happen. Further associated with the risk at intersections are some things that are often forgotten. And they're the fact that at intersections, we put a lot of fixed hazards. So we have maybe signal poles. We often have a power pole because that's a point where you would often want to, turn your wires down the other road. We often have lighting poles and columns and culverts because drainage challenges of crossing another road. So we actually place at a lot of intersections fixed hazards, and people are concentrating a lot just on the vehicle-to-vehicle collision or the vehicle-to-pedestrian collision or the like. But there is actually a significant increase in runoff road crashes at intersections. And it starts with a vehicle maybe entering the intersection and then another vehicle avoiding or clipping those vehicles. And we see runoff road crashes spike around intersections as well. So we need to think about that, add that into our mix. And I mean, signal pedestal is a very interesting one because those are rigid hazards. some of them have some collapsibility, but or some frangibility, but fairly rigid objects, and we place them very close to running lanes, and just bury our head in the sand away from those as a run-off road risk. Interesting way that we've just somehow decided that's exempt from being a roadside hazard. But I'd love anybody's comments on that, or if they've done any work in that space. I know there's some investigation of a more, much more frangible signal pedestal, but I haven't seen anything significant. I mean, I feel there's some merit to some of that US style, cast wires over your road and hang your signals, because you can get things further out, and use of mast arms and the like. So this is from Monash University Accident Research Centre, and it's a very high level sort of philosophy of how do you get better safe system alignment with an intersection. And I won't spend long on it, but I'm going to jump back to something we talked about just at the end of last module, which was exposure and likelihood and severity. And this is going to be a really important part of today's module and your assignment. So I want you to start getting your head into the ability to categorize things into exposure or to likelihood or severity. But these principles of intersection design to get higher alignment with safe system principles, these first two, I mean, they're practically very hard to do, but in theory, they're fine. Fewer vehicles and fewer intersections. What we're actually addressing with those two is the exposure to crashes. So we're saying there will be less people exposed to intersection crashes if we have less vehicles going through there, or we have less intersections. Then if we're talking about conflict points per intersection, and there's a whole raft of other stuff within that, but we'll just stick to conflict. That is the likelihood of crash, okay? So the chance that you'll crash increases with the amount of conflict points. There's just more chance that you will collide with somebody. Then you see we've got here all of these things that address the severity of crash, which are speeds and angles, thinking about the biomechanics of the human body and how much force we can handle. So we talked about some of the speed thresholds, and we're thinking if it's a 90-degree collision, we're thinking less than 50 kilometers per hour. If you can get more angle on that, we can increase that speed. And that, I'll do that now. So if you cast your mind back to your high school physics days and remember vectors at all, if you crash, or if you have vectors that are like that, you have some energy pushed out to the environment, right? If you have the vectors like that, more of the energy is pushed out into the environment. Okay, now that's, you can visualize that quite easily with vehicles. If they crash a bit more like that, they're sort of bouncing off each other. And so this is what we're thinking about, where we can get a little bit more speed out of an intersection by adjusting that angle that the crash might happen at. Of course, pedestrians and cyclists and motorcyclists and our vulnerable road users, we knew that threshold speed around that 30 kilometers per hour. And then if we're not sort of able to meet these biomechanical thresholds, we should be looking to alter the intersection design, or the way we are exposing road users to risk. So I'll explain that a little bit further and show you some options that we've got. So here's some more basics around speeds and angles, and this is passenger vehicle crashes. but you're seeing that, you can kind of have passenger vehicles crashing in pretty much any configuration at that 40 kilometre per hour, and everything's generally okay. I mean, it's not, we don't want that to happen, but we generally can bring that within survivable levels, right? So if thresholds out about 50 for that right angle, being pretty much our worst crash type, then as we get more angle, we can get more speed, and that head-on / rear end. Now, rear end's a bit of a funny one. There's a bit of industry debate around rear end and how that works. You've certainly got some, physics advantages going with you, where vehicles, are getting pushed forward, and they can get pushed forward and the like. But we do see some pretty severe sort of spinal injuries and things associated with rear end crashes. But generally, we talk about 70 kilometers an hour for rear end and head-on crashes. And 80 kilometers an hour, we say not feasible. Like, you cannot operate with our current fleet and the energy management and the biomechanics of humans, we can't operate an intersection at 80 kilometers per hour or above. But it's 80 kilometer per hour differential speed. So what do I mean by that? Well, you can operate an intersection above 80 kilometers an hour, no worries. But you kind of need to accelerate your vehicles up. So your delta V is in within tolerable levels. So you can sort of have a big acceleration lane, and you can have vehicles coming through there at high speed. And as long as the difference between, X and Y is within the sort of tolerable limits, we're in territory where we have acceptable forces exerted when the crashes happen. You need to think a lot about how you design this, of course, but in theory, that's sort of how we think about it. We think about the delta V, that the change in velocity, that is. Okay, so I think a few questions are coming in there, which I'll address now, and I'll probably come back to. So Peter's asking, wouldn't adjusting the angles potentially conversely increase likelihood by reducing visibility? So taking from column A to give to column B. Wonderful question. And certainly that is the case in some situations. Very much for things like the stand-up angle of slip lanes or the like, absolutely. You do sometimes get configurations where you are able to, provide reduced likelihood angles such that either they, have good acceleration lanes or the like, or the angles are such that vehicles, get good sight lines. But the principle of what you're asking is very good. So maybe Kez a prize there, because I think that's a very relevant one, and immediately able to see, and which I'm quite excited that likelihood is that one of the chance of the crash, and we're talking now about angles, which is about the severity of crashes. Do exposure and likelihood go hand in hand somewhat? Would reducing the number of conflict points per intersection reduce exposure as well as likelihood? So that, Andrew, I'm giving out, I'm on a prize frenzy here because I'm getting good questions straight off the bat. Prize for Andrew, because this is one of the hardest things you'll probably do, especially for people who have experience in road safety, in thinking about risk on the road network, because we have always combined exposure and likelihood. They have been one in the past, and to separate those out takes a little bit of thinking, getting your head around where are we separating these out. So if you take an intersection and you reduce the conflict points, if you are talking about the whole intersection, okay, we've reduced the chance of crash over that whole intersection. If you zoom in very focused at that particular point where that conflict could have occurred and we've removed that conflict point, then it's the exposure. But what we generally do in a safe system assessment is we're looking at that intersection as a whole. So you haven't removed the exposure to crashes, okay? Because there's still those other conflict points. If you've eliminated all of those conflict points, then we are in the position of saying we've changed the exposure. So now, without trying to confuse people, technically you could, if you wanted to, do some sort of safe system assessment in microscopic detail and segment an intersection and quadrant up an intersection and like look at exposure, likelihood and severity at all these conflict points. Like nobody would ever do that. It's far too, well, I mean, that's the kind of thing I'd expect a university, you know, final year student or something to spend, you know, 6 months doing, like a methodology that. It's practically, for our purposes, it's not going to be useful. It's not what we want to be doing. What we do is we look at an intersection and we try to holistically say how are we getting better alignment with safe system principles or not getting better alignment with safe system principles at this intersection as a whole. So if we have an intersection and we block off a leg here, yeah, we've removed a lot of conflict points, that's for sure, but we have not changed the exposure at the intersection based on conflict points. We may have changed it based on the number of vehicles that get into that intersection. We'd be thinking about how many were in there and how many are there now able to get in there. But the simple conflict point analysis, the fact that we've significantly reduced the number of conflict points, we're still thinking about exposure based on the number of vehicles or the number of pedestrians or the number of cyclists. So I'm going to continue to give you examples of this. Looks like we've got a hand raised. Kez, do you want to? Oh no, maybe that was an accidental hand raise. Somebody wanted to explore this in more detail. Yes, okay, an accidental hand raise. No worries. Yeah, I'm gonna keep explaining this, and this is the topic, kind of the topic of your assignment this week, because we want you to really get that clear in your mind how you categorize these exposure, likelihood, and severity. Now, at a very basic level, I want you to start thinking about intersections and thinking about angles of crashes when we're thinking about crashes with passenger vehicles. Now, you don't need to be this precise, as you see on the diagram here. We just generally think through what's the crash that could occur and what's the angle that it could happen. And, you know, I'd be thinking, okay, that's about a right angle. Okay, peers that are designer here, they're using CAD, has, you know, spat out that it's 104, but yeah, it's kind of close enough to 90 degrees. That, you know, I would be saying, okay, passenger vehicle to passenger vehicle. I know I've sort of got that threshold speed of about 50 kilometers per hour. That's what I'm aiming to get vehicle speeds down, as in the bullet vehicle, the one that's coming in this way, the bullet vehicle. Over here, I go, okay, I've got a lot more angle now on that bit. I could actually say that that's more like 60 kilometers per hour as my threshold speed. So you can see just immediately, I've got the road users involved in the crashes that I'm expecting. I've got the angles, and I'm starting to think about speed. And they're the things that we can sort of control and design. we have very little ability in our roles to influence the types of vehicles, the safety features within those vehicles, the protection devices that the occupants have on, the frailty of the individuals in the vehicles. Are they old, frail people, or are they, very strong, well-built people? They're very different forces. But what we sort of have ability to control are the speeds those vehicles come in at, and the angles on which they will collide. We also have the ability to do a lot to try to lessen the chance that they crash. But under our safe system, even when we do everything right in that space, our duty is to assume a crash will still happen and look to manage that within biomechanically tolerable levels. So I mentioned this before, and I won't spend long on it, but the vehicles hit each other and then there's a resultant different force. But it does make you think about fixed hazards around an intersection. And here's a bit of research that maybe didn't need to be done. It was done by the University of Adelaide, the Centre for Automotive Safety Research, looking at a whole lot of intersection crashes and the secondary impacts that cause death and serious injury. And so you can see they replotted them all onto the axes here, where the vehicles came in, and that's where the secondary crashes were mainly occurring. I think I probably could have given you a blank one of those and you would have come up with pretty much the same, but it's just something to be thinking of. So I can't stress enough that you need to start equating angles for passenger vehicles, speeds, to energy thresholds. Okay. I'm going to give you a little task to do. I'll give you a little bit of time to do this as well. And it's what I call the safe system intersection exercise. So we have an intersection here. It's existing, obviously, because you can see it. And I'm going to give you some information about this intersection and then give you your task specifics. So what we have here is a, let me change color here to red. So we've got an arterial highway, like a highway, and we've got a 70 km/h speed limit on this 2-lane in each direction road. It's a highway. It carries about, about 12% heavy vehicles. It's got somewhere in the order of 22,000 vehicles a day. It's a bus route. That's a bus stop there. This side road, the intersecting road, that's a 50 km/h local collector road. It has about maybe 2,500 vehicles a day, so it gets a bit of traffic. There's a school sort of down the road here, quite a large school, maybe 400 meters, 300 meters down the road. This is all residential area, as you can see. This is like a drainage culvert, drainage structure. That's a shared user path, pedestrians and cyclists. This is a service road, two-way service road. And there's a bit of a, pedestrian sort of refuge there, and then what I would call a Danish offset crossing or a Z crossing, which is annoyingly the wrong way around, because you should face those that should be you walk into it and you walk along and you face traffic. But I've got it the other way around. Minor little issue, very minor. That's not going to be the source of our, major death and serious injury, but probably one that makes the road safety auditors in the group's eyes twitch when they look at it. So yeah, that's some intel about this intersection. So let's have a look at from the ground level. You can see it there. So that's where that intersecting road comes out. And see the bus stops there. You can see it's got a turn lane, lighting. Let's have a look from the other direction. There we go. You can see over here is our shared user path that sort of comes in. That's that drainage culverty structure thing there. You can see a sort of shoulder / bike lane thing going on here. So what your task is to alter things so we remove death and serious injury crashes at this location. Now, I'm going to give you a budget. Now, because I like this group, I'm giving you an extra $1 million. You know, $4 million. But you can't close the intersection because we've done the community consultation. There's really no other good ways out without really running a whole lot of vehicles and buses and things through residential areas for a significant period. So that's unacceptable. And you can't, you're operating in the current political and organizational framework that you're currently in. So if you come up with extreme ideas, I might be asking you, well, how are you going to get that approved by your organization and how's your community going to be on board with that and the like? Now, some of you might be saying, well, hang on a second. No, saying, well, I don't know how much things cost. So how am I meant to know what $4 million can buy? Well, I am your instant cost estimator tool. And you simply write into the chat what you want to do and then put cost ? Afterwards. And I will tell you immediately how much that would cost at this location. So that might help you. If you've got a feel for it yourself, just have you can have an estimate and a guess. That's not the purpose of this. No, we're not doing precise cost estimation. It's more what we would come up with. Now, okay, roundabout cost. So we've already got some cost questions coming in, which I will actually, I'll address cost questions in a second. I just want to give you the output I'm looking for. The output I'm looking for, and you will type this into the chat, are a list of things you would like to do, and next to them, either an E, an L, or an S, because you're either changing the exposure to crashes, the likelihood of crashes, or the severity of crashes. And sometimes you can change more than one, like it could be likelihood and severity by one initiative, or it could be, well, they're the one that you usually get together. So you're going to come up with this list, -E or bracket E after it, or L after it, or S after it, each item that you put in. So let me give you an example. Something ridiculous that you wouldn't be able to do is a flyover, a grade separation, complete grade separation of this intersection. And the reason I say it's ridiculous is because it would cost you $48 million, and that's well above your $4 million. But it would influence the exposure to crashes because we've removed that. Now, yes, admittedly, upon the entry ramps and those sort of things, we'd have some things to deal with, but predominantly it would be the exposure. So that's your task. Now, let me go back to what we had there. So we have a request for a cost for a roundabout. So to put in a roundabout in accordance with the Austroads Guide to Road Design Part 4B will cost you $7.8 million out of budget. And that's predominantly due to service relocations, the structure, the size the roundabout needs to be to cater for the larger vehicles, swept paths. How much would it cost to install traffic signals? Traffic signals would be $3.2 million. Traffic signals, 3.2 million. It's somewhat nicely set up in terms of how it exists to be able to get that, but it needs a bit of work. Okay, I'm going to give you a good 4 minutes to just ponder that, have a think, come up with ideas, and put them in. I see some stuff coming in already, but I'm going to give you a little bit of time. Pop your questions in, and if you've got any your cost questions, I will click through and try to answer those. Okay, there's a question. Is current political environment code for no vertical deflection? I wouldn't say that. That's an interesting question all around in terms of where things are at. And I'll come back to that. I think, Simon, that's a very good question.
Ken, I think John there was asking pedestrian underpass question mark. Was that a cost?
Pedestrian underpass cost. Well, yeah, it's 4 million. You can do it just on your 4 million. You sort of have to utilize the existing structure and deepen it in order to get some more height. You've got some challenges associated with personal security and some ways that people can get in and through, but 4 million will do it. You can just afford that. That'll be it. That's all you can do.
And I think Anatol's asking the cost of a raised table intersection.
So a raised table intersection, raising the whole intersection, it would be $720,000. Just some raised sort of platforms on approaches, different approaches would be $200,000 per approach. Can service lanes be connected at different locations? Yep. Yeah, there's other accesses in and out of those service roads. And we'll leave it to the detailed design to work out how garbage trucks and things will turn around and the like. If you want to close those, you're more than welcome to.
I think John there was asking about the vertical height of the adjacent drainage. I think we might have touched on that.
Yeah, it's about a meter. So that's why I said your money's spent making that deeper if you want to use it as an underpass. I am seeing some great stuff coming in here. Oh my gosh, this group's great.
It's going to take me some time to work out these prizes, Ken.
I kind of want to do an Oprah. Everybody gets a prize, but I won't quite do that. Remember to put in exposure or likelihood or severity. I'm seeing a lot of people doing really good at this in terms of coming up with ideas, and some are putting in exposure and likelihood and severity, and some are just popping their ideas in. I'll give you another 30 seconds for those who haven't popped in an idea, and then I'll talk to a few of them. Okay. Wow. Really excellent stuff here. I've been reading them as they've been coming in, and I'm impressed. And I will give out a few prizes. And not to say if you don't get a prize, yours isn't good. I'm just blown away by some of these in terms of detail provided. So Peter just put his in there with costs and specifics. I was just reading through it. Definite prize there because that's comprehensive. As is Irene's. I saw come in there as well. Hello, Irene. That is another comprehensive one. So I was just flicking through. There's a couple of immediate prizes. But let me start back up at the start, and let's have a little bit of a chat about what people are thinking. How they're thinking about it is what I'm really interested in. So yes, I mean, I think we all are interested in specifics of treatments and which we'd choose and why we would choose it. But for me, it's all about how do these treatments relate back to principles that we're trying to achieve in terms of risk reduction. So that linking back. So let's have a look. Yeah, fast out of the gates, John has recognised he wants to signalise the intersection because that will reduce the likelihood and possibly because John's got a good feel for, some of the challenges we face in an intersection like this, for a number of reasons associated with unbalanced flow and multi-lanes and then services, as I talked about. So sort of found signalisation looks to be something that's kind of attractive for a number of reasons. And this next comment I'm about to make is just absolute credit to Waka Kotahi and the local governments and the community in New Zealand for recognising that raised platforms and raised intersections in these locations is a possibility. I've run this course a lot, and I run it for a lot of varied jurisdictions and organisations. I run it in Queensland quite a bit. Nobody says raised intersection or raised anything like that. That just doesn't come up. It's not. It's like absolutely not an option in their mind. But what I'm liking to see here is that New Zealand is, able to open their mind to these possibilities, and we'll talk about why that's so important later. So quite a few people jumping onto that. So Chris has made a good point there around roundabouts and what they could influence, but certainly influencing severity of crashes. And that's a really good identification there, that's something we want to reduce. It would reduce the likelihood of some crash types, but actually increase the likelihood of others. So that's a bit of an interesting quirk. So Kelvin's had a look there and said a nice little treatment, a left in, left out treatment. So blocking off that ability to turn out and across. Now, this is that tricky one where I talked about if you were to block off the middle here, okay, technically so we've reduced conflict points, absolutely. The way we determine whether this reduces, reducing the conflict points, that reduces the likelihood of crashes, okay? There are still conflict points if somebody's coming left out of here. So there's still intersection crash potential, right? So that, in the removal of the conflict points, has not influenced the exposure. The exposure may have reduced by the number of vehicles that were coming in here going down. So I'll accept that in that specific, but it's certainly more about the likelihood of crash because we've got less conflict points. So Karen's popping in some guardrails and very well identified that is a reduction in the severity of crashes. So if we were to put guardrails along here, vehicles would leave the road. They wouldn't fall into the culvert. They would hit the barrier and they would run along the barrier. But that's still a crash. It's just a much less severe crash than dropping into that culvert. So spot on there from Karen, that is a severity reduction. And that's a little tricky one, I think. So that's prize-worthy as well, Kez. So Karen can have a prize for that. So I'm just, now this is where I'm going to skim through a little bit to look for some things that are a little bit out of the ordinary, or sorry, out of what most people seem to be saying. So Douglas can have a prize for his accurate categorization there. Race safety platform on each leg, severity, correct. Traffic signals, likelihood, correct. Reduced speed limit from 70 to 60, likelihood, correct. You could almost put in their severity as well. And fix underpass using maintenance budget, I love it. Trying to sneak some more money into the budget to open up that underpass. And that would, if you were able to make your drainage structure into an underpass for pedestrians, that would influence the exposure because the number of pedestrians crossing at grade would be less. Probably wouldn't have eliminated the number crossing, but the number crossing would be less. Okay. Now, some people freak out about this idea of using a drainage structure as a pedestrian underpass. I don't at all. In fact, I often have done that in the past. Not usually quite like this, but usually it's a creek and creating shared paths along the creek and then ducking under using existing structures. So you don't have to go across that road, you go under it using the existing infrastructure that's there. And some people say, oh, but people will drown. You know, it'll flood and they'll be, submerged underwater. I'm not going to go in there if it's filling with water. In fact, there's some pretty good guidelines out there on exactly how you do it. You just make sure there's an alternate route there and, there's clear visibility to it and everything's fine. And you just, using existing infrastructure. Apologies, I'm going to skip through a lot of this. I like Irene's one there, which has already got a prize, but race safety platforms, separating the off-road, separating cycling facilities to the off-road, and some really good categorization there. Another one that I wanted to talk to. Anatolio's made a good point there around signals won't remove fatal and serious injury crashes. I'm going to come back to that, but that's a prize-worthy comment, I think, in terms of safe system thinking. We know it will reduce fatal and serious injury crashes, but not remove, which was our aim, wasn't it? Geez, this is good. So many good. So a question in there, which was, just looks like it was to host some panelists, was, can we use a seagull intersection? And that's a very interesting one. And oh, I'm struggling to get my, bear with me a second here. That's what I'm trying to do. Too much writing on my slides already. So a seagull intersection, for those who aren't aware of what that is, I mean, that would be to have some sort of acceleration lane there, and then some sort of separator there. And so you kind of have vehicles come out here and then accelerate down. Now that, yeah, this is probably one of those ones which, if we go back to one of those earlier comments, it's going to reduce the severity of the crash because of those crash angles. But the likelihood of crash is going to go up because, well, first of all, that's an ugly thing to try to do, which is merge from the right. You're looking across the, the wrong shoulder. If you've got an articulated vehicle, for example, like a truck, which has got a, you're carrying something, you can't turn your head and see. Old people can't make those head checks often. It's just very awkward. And you'll significantly increase crashes in a lot of locations there, depending on how you've sort of designed it. We still have the sort of crash there, which is pretty much 90 degrees. So we've got some challenges associated with that. But there is situations where seagulls might improve. I personally don't like using seagulls, but there is some interesting work that was done by New Zealanders. So Shane Turner, and for some reason, John, I reckon you might have been involved in this. Correct me if I'm wrong. It's a development of a seagull intersection assessment tool. So you can plug in all your data and it spits out a risk score for whether a seagull intersection, so you're putting volumes in and speeds and the like and configuration. You get an indication of risk associated with a seagull. So I like the thinking. And it's probably the example actually where a lot of the time the likelihood of crash then starts to outweigh any benefits you get in reduction in severity at this location. And I still always worry about this location there, even with seagulls. Okay. Oh, I think Irene's putting in that research report, which should connect. Yeah, if that's on the Waka Kotahi website, there should be the spreadsheet available there as well within that. So you can have a look at that. Okay, I'm going to just run through a few slides, which sort of builds off some of the things that a lot of you have mentioned, and apologize I didn't get through everybody's, but I think it's wonderful comments in there. We will take our break shortly, but I do want to just cover off a few things here. So signalization was identified there, pretty early on as a pretty viable thing there. I mean, I think that shows people sort of understand how a network functions and what sort of treatments we'd use. But we solely attribute the risk reduction with signalization to likelihood. Now, of course, there is an argument to say, but some crashes, people will see the red light and slow down. And so when they crash, it'll be at lower speed. So surely it's severity as well. And so, yes, that's true, but we still have very much the potential for somebody to continue through at speed. And we see that a lot, and they run the red light, and we see those crashes happen at the same severity, sometimes even higher severity, because they're sometimes putting the foot down. And sometimes people will say, well, but we've reduced the exposure because, like, take this one, they've given a red arrow. That means they're not exposed to the crashes because they've been told not to go. Well, again, under a safe system thinking, we have to acknowledge that people will make mistakes, okay? They will run red lights. They will turn when it's not appropriate. There will be these conflicts still existing. And so the number of vehicles within and through that intersection, the number of pedestrians, the number of cyclists doesn't change by putting signals up. So the exposure doesn't change. So we're just addressing likelihood traffic signals. They are an effective treatment in reducing the likelihood of crashes. We know, rule of thumb, 45% reduction in crashes associated with the introduction of traffic signals. 45% less crashes. That's pretty good, right? So absolutely not a bad treatment from that perspective. But when you look at your network, and you can do this for any metropolitan area that has widespread traffic signals on high volume arterial road network, comes out the same. We've just been doing it in different countries, looking at a death and serious injury. And you basically have in an urban area of pedestrians and cyclists being killed and seriously injured. Then you have this massive outer ring of death and serious injury for passenger vehicles, pedestrian cyclists and motorcyclists as well. But the absolute bulk of it happens at large signalized intersections. Like, just all of these are large signalized intersections. And in fact, when you analyze the biggest location, the spots of most death and serious injury on any road network, the overwhelming majority are large signalized intersections. It's just that they are often put into this category of, well, we've done everything we can, and people should just going to have to start following the rules and not running red lights. Like, this is what it is. And that's where we've really got to question this, don't we? And what baffles me is that we build new signalized intersections all the time. And when you say, are you comfortable building this? You know people are going to be killed and seriously injured. It's just a wall comes up and say, no, well, it's good practice. I'm following all the standards and guidelines. People have to stop running red lights. At some point, with the amount of death and serious injury we still see at these signalized intersections, we need to start saying, we are stuffing this up. This is not engineering design for people. This is engineering design that in some theoretical world works if everybody absolutely follows the rules every single time. That's not reality. And it presents very clearly in any crash analysis of where our community is being killed and seriously injured on the roads. So roundabouts, and I like the fact that there are a lot of people who said, can I afford a roundabout? Can we get that in? Roundabouts we attribute to a reduction in the severity of crashes. Now, somebody also said in their likelihood as well, and I like that because they're thinking about reduction in conflict points. What we tend to see is this shift with the roundabout. We get about the same number of crashes when we have a roundabout or a priority controlled intersection with give way signs, stop signs, and things like that. It's just the severity is so much less. We actually sort of alter crash types here. There's a lot of rear end crash, minor crashes, little bumps and scrapes at these sorts of intersections between passenger vehicles. And so we just generally, in a safe system assessment, attribute it all to a reduction in the severity of crashes when we're thinking holistically about that. So roundabouts for a passenger vehicle to passenger vehicle crashes are just amazing, right? I'll talk about pedestrians and cyclists. I see comments come in there, pedestrians and cyclists at roundabouts. And there's some really wonderful things we can do for pedestrians and cyclists at roundabouts and gathering that. But if we're just talking sort of passenger vehicle to passenger vehicle, these are just amazing features. But why do they need to be so big, right? That was our big limitation, wasn't it? The cost. So this is huge. The land takes big, you can see, it's back here to open up sight lines, and we've got big circulating carriageway for that large vehicle. What about just little something like this? Very different road environment, isn't it? But nonetheless, these road environments and something like this will cater for larger vehicles because they just run over the top of it, won't they? Yeah, you might need to just check your swept path on the splitter islands and those sort of things. But you've sort of removed that part of it. But then you might think, well, have I just lost all the advantage of that deflection and the like? Well, the advantage and the reason these actually work quite well, not as well as a big roundabout, but pretty amazing for what they are, is because we have eliminated the perception of absolute priority. When I say perception of absolute priority, you could say absolute priority. What do I mean by that? If this was a T intersection and this top road just had free flow priority, the vehicles would go through here, drivers somewhat tuned out, carrying on at the speed that they're carrying on. Pretty much oblivious to the fact that there's an intersection. You know, we'd love drivers to be alert and have a look, but they don't. That's not how the bulk of the public are driving. But as soon as you put this in, we disrupt the absolute priority. So a vehicle approaching here isn't sure that they're not going to have to give way. Same here, same here. Everybody slows down, has a look around, wakes up. We've got wins. If you're worried about those, fast speeds through and the fact we haven't got angles altered, you can put, raised little bits and pieces around your roundabout, slow vehicles down, speed cushions, lots of options for that. So we can get some pretty good treatments. And, little window into, so Max McArdle, my colleague, is going to take you through some pedestrian cyclist stuff, but yeah, often utilising these as raised pedestrian crossings can be a pretty awesome thing. And I'm loving seeing the deployment of that around Aotearoa. It's quite exciting. So roundabout, here you go, back to passenger vehicle to passenger vehicle crashes. And this is Road Safety Engineering 101. It's like the first thing almost you get taught, isn't it? That a roundabout has a very small number of conflict points, whereas a set of traffic signals or a passively controlled intersection has a whole lot of conflict points. There's your conflict point diagram, just ways that crashes can happen. So that's one thing. And the way those crashes can happen. There's our example of where we actually do have pretty good sight lines and a really good crash angle, if you're thinking about crash angles. So, sorry, I'm just going to go back because I see Irene's question sort of relates to the, now, don't recount this Wally, all right? That Wally's already been counted. Okay. This gives you the look that, okay, we've got a lot less conflict points. So surely we would reduce the likelihood of crashes, wouldn't we? And from that perspective, you would say, yes, it's a simpler task. It's easy to do that. The reason Austroads decided to only attribute the reduction in risk to severity is due to rear end crashes and the number of these crashes that happen. So it's just based on the fact that we get lots of these very minor rear end crashes happening and minor bumps and scrapes and things. So it's literally a sort of numbers of crashes that happen. I do agree wholeheartedly that it's a much simpler thing to do and it's easier to navigate and all those sort of things. Traffic signals, I suppose, though, are fairly easy to navigate if they're done well. It's just a clear stop or go and turn or don't turn. There's just more, I suppose, conflict points there. Hopefully that helps out a little bit. So we were talking about angles of crashes. And this one's, I suppose, that last little thing I wanted to point out just before we have a break, which is sort of that disruption of absolute priority, where people drive in all states of consciousness. And I really, we all wish that drivers would be alert and compliant and have a good night's rest and a cup of coffee, and they're really focusing on this driving task. That is just not the case. They're driving half asleep, they've worked a double shift, they're thinking about the fight they've had there with their partner, they've had a few beers, they're they're making a cannonball run to their brother's wedding at to try to get there for the morning. Like it is just like, it's horrible the states people drive in, right? And you can get angry at it and just push it all back to them and say they need to be better and it's not our issue. Well, it is our issue. I mean, that's what we're dealing with. And if you're an engineer or a designer or a tech officer or whatever you are, our responsibility is to account for that in our design. Okay, if you want to try to, address that, we need to, maybe go into another field of road safety and start working on other things. But that's not going to be resolved. But we can design intersections to wake people up. Roundabouts wake people up. People don't miss roundabouts, or very occasionally they do, right? Drive straight into the middle. It's very, very rare. They make pretty good YouTube clips when they do. They hit them and fly off. But you put a big lump of infrastructure in the middle of the road, or even just design it so it disrupts priority. People wake up, they come back to it, they look around, they slow down, and you just have massive wins from that perspective. And we know that it alerts people, they interact with the driving task for the point that we know is that spike in risk that I told you about. So that's a massive, massive win. Whereas traffic signals, they don't. Well, some of them do. The bulk, I shouldn't say they don't. The absolutely overwhelming majority of people wake up and they slow down and they stop. But there's a segment of people who just don't. They don't come back to it. They don't interact with the road environment, and they go through at speed. And sometimes they are interacting, but they're deciding to go through at speed, and we get some very bad, very severe outcomes. So as we see our picture here of this gentleman yawning, it probably says it's time for a coffee, eh? So I'm going to give you a short break, just a 3-minute break, run, fill your coffee up, and we'll get back into it in 3 minutes. Thanks, Kez. Hit that record button. Now, I've told you some of you this story before, I think in a different forum, but it popped into my mind, and I think it's relevant to the discussion we've just been having. But let me give you the background here, and I'm going to change screens shortly. I was in the road safety department in the Victorian government at VicRoads, and there was a really massive, this is 15 years ago, there was a massive program of congestion easing, and it was called Keep Melbourne Moving. That's the name of the program, and some massive $100 million investment. $100 million was a massive investment program back then, probably not very big at all these days, but anyway. And it was brilliant traffic engineers, had models of the network, identified points, and said, changes need to be made. So they went then in, they developed up designs, and they were submitting those to for funding, and part of it was a review by the road safety department to check that it would be a safe outcome. And for those who sort of know a bit about network operations and the like, the removal of roundabouts and replacing with traffic signals under their traffic models was producing some pretty good outcomes for them in peak times. They were getting good congestion easing for some peak times under their traffic models. So that was the overwhelming majority of the projects, was to remove roundabouts and replace them with traffic signals, because that was working. So we would get those designs in, and we'd look at them, and we'd analyze them, and we started producing this memo. So what they were expecting of us was, check, they've got the right phasing, is it, visibility of the signals, all those usual things, which we did check. But we also decided, like, let's pop this on. And so I took a template copy of the memo. So yeah, from the road safety department. Okay. The road safety department has analysed this project as increasing crashes as follows. Project life, 20 years. Number of deaths attributed to this project, 2.3. We put little people there. Just hammer home, you're going to kill some people here. Number of serious injuries, 12.6. Statement of acceptance. The above road trauma is accepted by. And so that sat on top of our report back to them. And yeah, so actually, I hope you can see that screen. Kez, you can see it, can you?
Yes, I can see that.
Yeah, good. We were, like, to a degree, intentionally, disrupting things. Did we ever get any signed? No, of course we didn't. Nobody was signing that. Did we get some pretty angry people calling? Well, we did. Dragged into, executive directors' offices, and said, this is, we have a lot of competing demands in the management of the network, and you don't boil it down to these simplistic statements. Well, just if you're going to kill and seriously injure the community for a bit more travel time, okay, sign up to that. Anyway, so they didn't like that. But nowadays, I think we don't need to be so inflammatory, because a safe system assessment kind of does that in a much more palatable way. Anyway, just thought it was an interesting little case study. The actual working out of those numbers is very kind of easy. I mean, you can go into absolute precision on how you do it, but at a general sense, that's sort of like a 10, 15-minute exercise, and you can work that out from existing to the future scenario. Now, roundabouts aren't all the same, and you don't get the safety, as much safety benefits with different roundabout configurations and roundabout design, and it's fascinating area. I've been getting a lot into it, writing some roundabout design guidance for different governments in terms of compact roundabouts and those sort of things. But I throw this in as an interesting one for you, almost as much as anything else. But double lane roundabouts can cause trouble, especially if the inner radius is small. You can get high speeds. But turbo roundabouts, which are two-lane roundabouts, sort of bring that speed through back to a really, I suppose, interesting level. So a turbo roundabout, for those who aren't familiar with it, has a raised concrete separator on the approach, a raised concrete separator dividing your lanes in there. So if you want to do a right turn, you sort of get into that lane, you get into the middle, that channelized area, and you sort of track around out. It's pretty exciting performance out of these. You can see another one there. And I love this one. Like, have a look at this. You've got a truck that's obviously made an error because, hey, humans make errors. And we've got this vehicle coming up here. Look at the angle. Angle of crash, if that is going to be a crash, is beautiful. We know this white van is going slow. Like, it has to be going slow. It's got a nice radial sort of roundabout structure to it. It can't be going fast. And so we've got this beautiful, just wonderful conflict happening here. If that was a signalized intersection and a mistake had been made by this vehicle and it had come out, it's less likely that they would have come out, absolutely. But if they had, the angles would have been horrible, the speeds would have been bad, and we would have seen a worse outcome. Do we have any examples of turbo roundabouts in New Zealand? So, yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. I think there's some sort of, half like hybrid turbos. And I think, yeah, we're getting some off-ramp examples and things. But I'm not too sure on that. It's a good question. Why do I put this up there? Well, it's just awesome. That's the first one. But the second one is because of another story I've got, where we had this Dutch road engineer who we brought over to do some work with us on cyclists at roundabouts. And I just happened to have this picture. I'd not been to this location, but this is in the Netherlands. And I was showing that to this Dutch engineer, and I said, this is amazing. Like, the sheer land take of this is huge. And the complexity of it, he said, well, it's not that complex when you're on the ground level. You just sort of follow your path and it's signalized. And like I was saying, but in Australia, based on what you're sort of seeing there, this would be just a large signalized intersection. And it might get grade separated at some point in the future, but it would be a large high-speed signalized intersection. And this would just couldn't compute to the Dutch. And he's like, at what speed? And he's like, but what about all the death and serious injury that would occur? I'm like, yeah, I know. Just could not fathom that you would run a large signalized intersection with volume at the speeds in which we do it. They'll go to these lanes, not to do that, to slow vehicles down to improve angle. So, then you get some interesting concepts, and this is a concept, but people are starting to try to disrupt through fast movements, but still retain as much of the traffic throughput as possible for these major arterials, which are traffic routes. Like, we're not getting around that. And these are interesting because, like cut through roundabouts and all sorts of good things where, the vehicles approaching here, they are disrupted and they change their angle, they wake up, they slow down, and we've just got some wins out of that. So interesting concepts coming out. But as I talked about earlier, like the idea of raised safety platforms and raising arterial roads and the like. 10 years ago, just absolutely not. Get out of the office. Like you're not talking to us about raising anything. No vertical deflection on the arterial network. That's absolutely not going to happen. We've changed, and it was wonderful to see so many people there suggesting that, or at least contemplating the idea that you could raise it. The first thing is to get out of your mind that this is like an urban speed hump. Okay, it is something, and you can change ramp angles, so the grades and heights and things to adjust to get different speeds as you like. So that intersection you were looking at, I mean, that was the proposal that they came to the conclusion, as many of you did very quickly, that signalisation is what probably needs to be done there. But they knew that there were signals down the road, and there were lots of signals in their area that had lots of death and serious injury. And they were finally at the point of questioning, are we prepared to just put another one in and just expect some miracle to happen that people won't run the red light and won't, and everybody will absolutely conform? But they were sensible enough to say, that ain't going to happen. So we should try to lessen the severity, get the speeds down a bit as they go through this conflict point that's there. So they looked at these raised platforms only on these approaches. Why only on these approaches? Because they're the bullet vehicles, aren't they? They're the ones that are doing the damage. These vehicles coming in and going out, they don't have enough speed to do damage. To pedestrians, they do, and cyclists. But if we're thinking about the vehicle to vehicle, they're not the bullet vehicles. So, just dampening speeds here and here. And so they built that one, and that's one of the examples. And there's lots and lots of examples out there now, and you've got some, springing up nicely around New Zealand. And you can see there slowing vehicles down 50 kilometres an hour, because their dominant concern in this environment was vehicle-to-vehicle right-angle crashes. And the threshold speed is 50, so they designed the ramp grades to try to get vehicles down at 50 or below. So, and I really love this photo. I was out there with a colleague doing the post-opening road safety audit of this new intersection. And, we see a vehicle slowing down at a green light. That's just a huge win, because this is the conflict point. This is the area of increased risk, and they slow down to go through. And traffic operations people, just like so mad when they see this photo. They're like, this is so inefficient. I hate this. We're impacting on every vehicle that goes through there for this, 1 in a million chance. I'm like, well, if we'd built a roundabout there, everybody would have slowed down, and you wouldn't have been shouting the way. But the fact is that this is different. It's not something that you're used to, and so of course they get angry at it. That's human nature. Change, difference, resistance. So we just work through it. I love this one as well, because anybody who knows the traffic engineering thing called a dilemma zone, the dilemma zone is that point in time and space where a vehicle is in a dilemma as to whether or not to put the foot down and go through the orange, or to brake and stop. I'm sure you've been in the dilemma zone. The dilemma zone is just like shrunk and almost eliminated with the addition of that simple little raised platform, because the drivers, they don't want to put the foot down. There is a little dilemma zone, but they will brake. They're already braking on the approach to it. So just a wonderful little spin-off benefit. There's your Hamilton one, just outside Hamilton, Gordonton, Thomas and Gordonton. I think, yeah, that's it. So nice little example there, your local one award-winning stuff. And lots of examples from around Australia and New Zealand now. And, people say, oh, it's only for, your lower volume roads. This road carries 55,000 vehicles a day, major heavy vehicle route, bus route, emergency vehicle route. This one carries 25,000 at least vehicles a day. These are big intersections. I love the fact that this one used to be a roundabout. And, only 3 years ago, a congestion easing program, rip out roundabouts, put in traffic signals. But there was the mandate for safe system assessments. And the safe system assessment out of this one was showing that, that something had to be done to keep speeds down, and elected sort of raised safety platforms here. They could have signalised the roundabout, they could have done other ways to do it, but that was pretty exciting. So I think there was a request there for some guidance. So I'll point you at 2 documents. Road Safety Platforms, Victorian Government Road Design Note 0307 has some good information about ramp grades and the like at different speeds, but the effectiveness and implementation of raised safety platforms has some really great detailed information produced by New Zealanders, and really solid work. Dispels a whole lot of myths and rumours about these, like trucks can't go over them, buses, all the passengers will be flung around, the noise will be unbearable, you can't do, can't drain, and like these are all like they're valid things to work through, but none of them actually play out when you build them. Like they're all just people's concerns because this is new and they haven't done it, and that's what they think. I also think, oh man, this is the most dangerous thing ever. People will hit it at 70 kilometers an hour and go flying off into the houses, Dukes of Hazzard style. These aren't happening. They're just people slow down and they navigate through the intersection. It works really well. Okay, I better keep moving on a bit. But I think what I really want you to take away there is that the principle that people were absolutely acknowledging as they came up with this is that even your best designed traffic signals, people make mistakes. And we've done nothing to address the severity of incident as people run those red lights. And I still see it time and time again that people, think that if we put the signals in, we can concentrate more on reducing the likelihood of crashes and we will, eliminate heart trauma. We're not going to. Like even mast arms, LEDs, red light cameras, even, just regulatory speed limit reductions around it, that helps quite a bit, but we're still just reliant on people, behaving without anything physical for them to navigate. As soon as you change that physical form, we're in a much better position. I like this example. I won't spend long on it. It's just another example of where a region and a group of individuals challenged the norm, which was they looked at this intersection, they wanted a roundabout, they couldn't afford it because they had to move a massive telecommunications structure and acquire all this land. It was just too much. And so it pretty much got to the point where they're just going to build some right turn lanes and some warning signs and the like. But they challenged that and said that's not going to address the severity of these incidents. And they pushed and they kept pushing and they pushed hard and they got to the point where they came up with a compact roundabout and used again some vertical deflection to try to slow vehicles on the approach, but just a much smaller roundabout. And those of you who were at the Road Safety Conference in Christchurch last year, I presented some of the details of this one, but also the design guidance for compact roundabouts. which I can happily provide to anybody who wants. Again, you know, you've got shallow raised platform ramp grades, you've got a small actual roundabout, you've got a big concrete apron, so a large vehicle can trip over that with a big swept path. And you just land take and your reverse curves on the approach. You don't need to take as much land. You can do these for sort of half the cost of a full-size roundabout. So here it is built. You can see the raised platforms, shallow raised platforms on the approach, and then raising the whole area. And it's a bit of a drone footage actually. So you can see there the little roundabout in the middle, and then the big concrete apron, and just a bit of a tweak on the sort of usual design on these high-speed roads. Right, Peter saying that this is a big roundabout for New Zealand. Okay, there are some pretty. I'm sure there are some pretty small roundabouts there as well. When you're building them from scratch, most people do tend to build some pretty big ones on these high-speed arterial networks for the larger vehicles. But yeah, point taken. What is the speed limit on this one? Yeah, so this it was 100 kilometers per hour coming in, and then just trying to use the platforms to start to bring the speeds down the same way your reverse curves on the approach would. They actually did, in the development of it, reduce it to 80 kilometers per hour coming in for this roundabout. So it's a speed limit reduction, and then you get into your raised platforms. Little quiz, Kez, you reckon we might have a little quiz just as a little break up of the stuff, and then I'll quickly move through some other information. Okay, just a one question one. True or false? Traffic signals are not safe system. True, false, or unintelligible question, which means then your question doesn't make sense. Like, what do you want about? All right, 3, 2, 1. Kez, let's end that. And display results. Oh, we've got a good mix. True, false, and unintelligible question. Well, I would have leaned towards unintelligible question, but it depends what, and the reason for that is depends what perspective you come at it from and the context of it. And I think if you had in your mind a high-speed arterial road environment and said true, okay, that's right. But if you had, you know, the false one there saying that, well, it's not the traffic signals that are aligned with safe system or not. It's you know, there's principles of the safe system. I think that is correct. And unintelligible question because I didn't give you context. Also, like saying safe system is some binary thing. That is safe system or that is not is a bit of an unintelligible way to talk about things. So there's you know, confusion there. But the reason I popped this in is that I have had people come out of the course and say, we can't ever do traffic signals again because they're not safe systems. Like, whoa, how do we leap to that? No, just think about the context that you're in, the energy, acknowledge people are going to make mistakes, and then, you know, design things accordingly. So good. Okay, let's stop that. And while we're doing that, I saw in the notes there somebody popped in the the Bunnythorpe roundabout. I was having a quick look at that. It's a funny one. A nice little flushed circle. Good little funny example there. I won't get into the design details of it. Lane departure. Okay. So here we go. We've got a long, straight, relatively straight road. It's got a centre line, got edge line, got a bit of sealed shoulder. It's got a road reserve with some trees, some cleared areas. Got the occasional minor access point, minor intersection. Without knowing anything about this road, it goes on for about 300 kilometres. Pop in the chat, what are the types of crashes that you expect? What are the types of crashes you expect along this route? Okay, well, everybody knows it. It's head-on crashes and run-off road crashes. And yep, like crash, if you want to look for a cause, yeah, it's mainly people falling asleep, but certainly people being distracted by things. And yeah, it's just dotted along the whole route. And you can pretty much do this with any of the high-speed routes across New Zealand that are, long and straight, and it's just people running off the road and people head-on crashing. And that happens at speed, and they're killed and they're seriously injured. We know it. We know it's a massive problem. And yeah, we need to start altering our designs. Yeah, not as many long, straight sections in New Zealand, lots of curves, but you still see a lot of the same crash types happening. But there was, just before I do jump on, I mean, Peter's made a point around signals being, having advantages in terms of other road users and how they navigate it. I do absolutely agree that there's some significant advantages, and my colleague Max, who's going to take you through some of that, we'll talk about, how we get the advantage of being able to create environments that are walkable, that are rideable, that are navigatable for people with mobility impairment, and that are not inhibitors to them walking and riding and those sort of things, but also provide us that safe system outcome, or highly aligned safe system outcome. Yeah, so we just have a massive amount of the network with these sort of characteristics of high speeds and separation by a white line, and then some small shoulder and runoff area before very severe roadsides. And in order to survive these, we need people to not leave their lane. And unfortunately, they do leave their lane. And they will continue to leave their lane. And we can do everything we can to lessen the fact that they leave their lane. And we will continue to do that, because sometimes we can't afford to significantly reduce the severity. But really where we want to get to is that we don't have people being able to get to a point source hazard like this, because there's a lot of energy, as we talked about in the first module, being imparted by a point source hazard like a tree or a power pole, even a culvert. And the amount of energy is just like astronomical. So yeah, this is a pretty severe crash coming up. So just be warned here. This is about 60 km/h estimated impact speed with this pole. I think I need to. So the energy associated with that speed and the single point source hazard is just astronomical and unsurvivable forces, let alone the speeds that we drive near trees and power poles, and people are falling asleep and leaving the road and then yawing because they try and get back on the road. So they're exposing the sides of the vehicles, and it's just a really bad scenario. Clearing the roadside has some advantages, but the advantages are limited. Like, you can clear roadside and just keep clearing it of hazards, and you significantly reduce the crash numbers because people run off the road and then they recover and then they come back on. You don't eliminate it. There's rollover crashes start to get more and more, and they go some pretty amazing distances beyond anything you clear as well, and get hazards and the like. So we know that we basically asymptote out risk somewhere around 4 run-off-road casualty crashes per 100 million VKTs by creating cleared areas. And it just, like, yeah. The reality is, though, also we just can't clear roadsides, and we don't want to. We want to, keep the vegetation, keep the, remnant vegetation, which the roadside happens to have a lot of. And the cost of doing it and the controls and things just makes it often unachievable. So I'll jump through that. Clear zone has been removed from Austroads. It does not appear in, well, there's a reference to it that it's not being used anymore in Guide to Road Design Part 6. We know clear zones aren't necessarily a safe place to be. People will go beyond it, they'll roll over. We get some good value out of the first little bit, but then it diminishes after that. So we wouldn't build a new road. You would, duplicating State Highway 1, you wouldn't do it like this, because, 5 years ago, that's how Austroads would have told you to do it, or even 3 years ago, Austroads would have told you to do it. Big separation, cleared area in the middle. You probably wouldn't have these bushes or trees or whatever there, but generally big cleared area, edge line, and then your row of hazards at 9.1 meters or 11.1 or whatever you calculated as the old clear zone. That's not how we do things anymore. Certainly you see roads built like this, and it's absolutely, it's just tragic to see often that we have, there's one in New South Wales that I just could not believe was they opened up major duplication, and it was basically this sort of alignment without median roadside. And it was within 2 months of it opening, a vehicle straight across, family driving that way. I think it was 6 fatalities all up. 2 months after opening a like a $1 billion road. Imagine if a train line was opened up and within 2 months 6 people were killed. Like, the line would be shut down. It would be, a full, set of work. Like, there would be nobody traveling on that until that was absolutely rectified. Yet, that was just sort of run of the mill. So if we look into new Part 6, it's quite interesting, and it has better ways of dealing with roadside risk and head-on risk. And I'm not going to go through details of it. It's a 3-day course to get into full barrier design and all of that, which welcome you to come along to. And there's some really good ones offered locally in person in New Zealand as well. Basically, what we're doing is creating bumper bowling of roads. Barriers, 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 continuous. Just just assume people are going to leave their lane. Create this environment where they do, they hit something and they run along. That's what we want. That's our highest alignment with safe system principle. I mean, yeah, you could make a bigger, wider median and have 2 barriers, but yeah, like that just at that high level philosophy, that's what we're thinking. Implementation, though, is key, and how you design it. There's lots of design specifics and catering for vehicles that need to pull over and break down, and those sort of things is important. But I'll end on this before I show you the assignment. There's not a particular thing about this product as such that I'm interested in, but again, it's about energy management. So here's a crash that involved this old Ford, 4 male occupants, 2 in the morning, high speed. It's just classic. And yeah, you go, this happens all the time. And we don't want them to do it, but the story is so familiar, and pretty much every small town in Aotearoa and every major city, you can point at these happening every couple of years or every couple of months sometimes, that we have the same thing happening. Mistakes been made, it's at reasonable speed, and they're in an old vehicle, and there's lots of them in there, and you just go, what can we do about it? Well, this one happened to leave the road and they hit a power pole, but the power pole had this thing on it, which was a raptor cushion. And a raptor cushion works in the way that it's kind of like a football goalpost padding in terms of it absorbs a bit of energy, but that's not its major thing that's really good. You get a bit of energy absorption. That's not going to be enough. Like the physics of that doesn't work. But what it's designed to do is to rotate when impacted. And the idea is to deflect the energy and run the energy out. So it's not hard connected to it. It's around the pole, and it will move as a vehicle strikes it. And I just love the fact that people are like doing everything they can to try to manage energy and dissipate energy over time, and not have those harsh abrupt stops. We won't do that quiz because I want to take you through your assignment. But I'll take any questions as we go there. Okay. So good session, and you did a really good job with starting to think through exposure, likelihood, and severity, and we're going to build on that. So if we go into the learning management system, we're in module 2. Hopefully, Kez, you're seeing this. I assume you are. Shout out if you're not. We go into module 2. And you can see there we've got the presentation. That's the Austroads report we talked about, effectiveness in the implementation of raised safety platforms. So that's there for you. There's that road design note I talked about. So that's where you can find the speeds and the ramp grades, and how to deal with drainage, where to position for large vehicles, heights, and a few other things. And there's actually a webinar on race safety platforms. If you haven't seen it, it goes for an hour, and you're interested, that might be something. It's an Austroads webinar, so you might want to have a look at that. Road design note we wrote on compact rural roundabouts is in there as well, just for your interest. And then you've got a quiz, of course. Again, that will be quick, but here's your assignment. So let's click on the assignment. And what you'll see is that you have 4 days and 7 hours before it's due. And there is just a PDF. So let's click on the PDF. We'll get that. Put it up. And you'll see that it is an editable PDF. And you've got instructions. You've got steps to follow. Okay, so we're trying to make it as easy as possible. Step 1, select an intersection, any intersection. Could be the one outside your house, or it could be one you've got safety concerns with, random one you just drop a pin on Google and Street View in at. It does not matter. You just choose an intersection. Okay? And you're going to fill out the information below with your name. You're going to put a link to your intersection on Street View or or just the coordinates or some way that we can just jump in and have a look as well. And then you're going to inspect the site, you know, via Street View, or if it's the one out the front of your house, you can just walk out and have a look at it. And then you're going to fill out the information on page 2. Factors that increase the exposure to crashes. I've given some examples. Factors that increase the likelihood of crashes. Factors that increase the severity of crashes. And then one thing that can be implemented to reduce the exposure, likelihood, and severity. Okay, so let's go to that. So it's into exposure, to likelihood, and to severity. Factors that increase, influence, exposure, the minimum 1, maximum 3 factors. You write them in here. And then factors that increase, influence the likelihood at this location. Factors that increase the severity at this location, write these in here. And then one change that can be made to reduce the exposure, one that can be made to reduce the likelihood, one that can be made to reduce the severity. So because we have a couple of minutes, I think I might just do one to make it easy for you. Let's go here and let's go there. Yeah, New Zealand. Where are we going to get to? We're going somewhere near Christchurch. We're near somebody's house. Here's an intersection, random intersection, absolutely random. On State Highway 1, it looks like. Okay, there we go. We've got a giveaway controlled intersection. And we're having a look at it. Oh, historic pub and galleries. That's good. Go there next time I'm in the area. Okay, so what we would do is I'd say, what's influencing the exposure to crashes here? Well, I'd say the number of vehicles coming out of that road will influence it, and the number of vehicles on this road will influence it, right? So as easy as that, I would simply say, where's my sheet? No, not that one. I'd say, you know, you may provide a bit more detail. There you go. There's a couple of things. And then I get to the likelihood of crashes. And I go, right, this is stop control. So I would immediately be able to say, so the fact that it's that control over other controls is a factor. It's going to influence. And then I might say, what else is interesting about this this road? I wonder how our sight distance is out of there. Yeah, sight distance, block there. Maybe sight distance, or I could say, you know, lack of any turn facilities. So we've got a vehicle prop here. Yeah, lots of reasons why you might pop that in. So you can pop some other ideas in. Could be, you know, lack of lighting. Could be the approach speeds of vehicles. Could be, it's a give way control, is it? It is a give way control, not a stop control. A stop line, no, anyway, it doesn't matter. It could be, you know, there's plenty of things. It could be the surface condition. It could be the line marking. It could be anything like that. Then the severity, well, I'd say, okay, geez, what's this? What speed do you reckon this vehicle would be going at? I could have a look for the dominant speed limit and the operating speeds, and I'd go, okay, well, it's high speed, so I might be popping in there. Something like that, you know, that's angle of crashes, 90 degrees. Oh, go to degrees. And you know, whatever else you see, and then one change. Well, I don't need to, you know, be super practical here, but I'll just go. That's going to influence the exposure and likelihood and severity. There you go. Done. Assignment done. Okay. Now, I want you to be a little bit more thoughtful and a little bit expand them out. But that essentially is all you kind of need to do. Now, what we are absolutely, well, what you are being marked on here is, are you categorizing exposure, likelihood, and severity correctly? Okay. The practicalities of your treatments and the like, you know, we're not too concerned about. Right? Try and be practical, but show us that you understand how to categorize exposure and likelihood and severity. So then you save the PDF and you go, you save that locally somewhere, add submission, drop it in here, or, you know, click upload file, find your file, upload a file from here, choose file if you want, or just drop it in from anywhere, save changes, and you're done. As easy as that. Now, a couple of things here as in our last minute. If you are struggling to understand what exposure, likelihood, severity, get in contact with us. If you can't access the system, get in contact with us. Can't work out how to upload, get in contact with us. We're here to help you get through this. So just contact the training email or whoever's got emails, and we will help you through it. Kez, have I missed anything?
No, just that there was a question about should they give consideration to historical crash history at an intersection, things like that?
No, not for this exercise. We don't need that. Just go in, what you see, have a look at the influence of exposure and likelihood and severity.
Oh, it says in general for an SSA.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll explain this in module 4, but crash history generally correlates with the end outputs of safe system assessments in terms of the score, but you don't use those to drive your scoring, right? They're just a thing you can use to check, are we on the general right path here? I'll explain that more in module 4, I promise.
I can't see any other questions.
Thanks, Kez. We'll yeah, let them go and log in a little bit early. And Max is going to talk to you about pedestrians and cyclists and show you some awesome stuff with roundabouts and traffic signals and all sorts of wonderful things for pedestrians and cyclists. Catch you next week.